I'm Diane Winston, and I hold the Knight Chair in Media and Religion here at USC. And I'm so glad to welcome you to the first of several forums that we're sponsoring on religion, politics, and the media. I think if you are here today, you might also be interested in joining us next Monday at 4 p.m. at the Law School when David Simon's going to talk about The Wire and religion and politics in that amazing television show. Wednesday of that week, E.J. Dionne is going to be here talking about his new book, Sold Out, 4 p.m. And Monday, March 10th, J.J. Goldberg, formerly of The Forward, will be here at lunch talking about Middle East American politics. And all of these are going to be really, really exciting forums, and you're all welcome to come. We believe there is such a thing as free lunch in the universe, so we make sure we feed people when they come to our events. And there's a lot of good fellowship and interesting conversation besides. So thank you for coming today, and I hope I'll see you again in the next 2 weeks. I also want to thank our co-sponsors for this event, the Unruh Institute, the Center for Religion and Civic Culture, the Office of Religious Life, and the Department of Political Science. Thank you all for helping make this possible, and thank you for coming today. I am so happy to be here with Amy Sullivan. I met Amy in 2000, 2001, and the first time I met her, I knew she was really, really a talented writer. That proved the case when I started reading this book. I have a confession to make. When I read books at night, they tend to be murder mysteries or body and that can't go out of this room. But I started reading this book. I couldn't put it down. It was like 2 in the morning. This is a page turner. It's an elegantly written, beautifully reported book that gives us something that we need to know, which is how did the Democratic Party come to be the bastion of secularism it has been? How does our political system work? What do Americans want in terms of the relationship to religion and politics? And not only, right now, Amy does an amazing job of setting up the history. So I recommend this to you across the board, whether you're student, faculty, staff, visitor. It's just a phenomenal work, and it's really enriched us all. So with that, and she's not paying me to say that either. And if you don't have a copy, there should be people from the bookstore outside when we're finished, and if you run and buy one, I bet Amy might even sign it for you. So with that in mind, I'm going to ask Amy, who, by the way, is an editor at Time. Her work has appeared in places like the New Republic, the LA Times, the Washington Post. She's been interested in religion and politics for the past 8, 9, 10 years. She's worked on the Hill. She comes from a strong evangelical background. She is the real deal, and I'm going to turn it over to her.
Thank you very, very much. I think that's definitely the most generous review I've gotten so far. So I may have to quote that on my website, Diane Winston. And thank you also so much for bringing me here to be able to talk to everyone. My employer, Time Magazine, is not incredibly thrilled about the fact that their political editor is taking a couple of weeks off of the heat of the campaign season to promote a book. But I told them before I even took the job, this is the reason I wrote the book. I'd like to sell copies, yes, so if you feel like buying a copy afterwards, please do. But mostly, this is just a story that has not been told anywhere. And I really felt moved to write the book when I myself was trying to do research and find information about religion and the left over the last, say, 30, 40 years, and found very few books out there. And so decided this was obviously something that was missing not only from our political discourse, but our public discourse, I think. And there's no better illustration of that than the fact that if you had told people 4 years ago that in 2008 it would be the Republican nominee for president who would be attacked by the religious right, who would have a very hard time getting religious voters enthusiastic about him, who last May and June, I think it was, had his religious liaison team quit because they said he was taking religion for granted, they were just being used and not listened to. People would send them out and say, give us lists of churches, but we don't want to hear from you otherwise. Sounds very much like traditional Democratic campaigns, and yet that's what we have with John McCain this year. And on the other side, whether the Democratic nominee is Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton, we know that in November, the Democrats will actually have a more sophisticated religious outreach, a more sophisticated understanding even of religion and how people inform their political beliefs by their religious backgrounds than on the Republican side. One of the things I argue, and one of the things we can talk about today, is that's not that unusual given our history. Most, if not all, of the progressive political movements that we've seen in this country have had some involvement by religious leaders. In fact, many of them were led by religious leaders. Everything from abolition to the labor rights movement, to women's suffrage, certainly the civil rights movement, disarmament, all our anti-war movements. These are all very much values issues, regardless of what we heard in 2004. They're very closely tied with religious communities, and yet we kind of forgot all of that history very quickly when the religious right appeared on the scene in the 1970s. I'll just talk kind of briefly about why that happened, what the implications have been for our politics, give you a quick reading of kind of the greatest hits of the book, and then I mostly want to hear your questions, because this is obviously not just a contentious topic, but a very, very personal topic. I'll give you just one story there. I wrote a piece that ran in the Washington Post over the weekend, and the editors put the headline on it, I'm an evangelical and a liberal. Really? Now, normally, and certainly 4 or 5 years ago, that kind of article would have gotten me reams of hate mail from both the left and the right. I love it when in the space of just a few minutes I'm told that I'm going to hell and I'm a theocrat. It's very difficult to accomplish both of those at the same time, but apparently I have critics who think I'm doing both. But this time, it was amazing. The response I've gotten has been overwhelming, but it's been 10-to-1 religious Democrats saying, thank you. Yes, we do exist, and no one ever acknowledges we exist. We don't have a home, because on the right, they tell us we can't possibly be Christians, we can't possibly be people of faith if we don't line up with their political beliefs. And on the left, they tell us to just keep our faith out of politics, that it has nothing to do with politics. And so there's just been this kind of outpouring that I didn't expect, but that I have to say is much preferable to the other kind, of people who are really responding to the idea that there is room for people of faith that's somewhere to the left of the religious right. So how did we get to this point where the conventional wisdom was that if you were religious, you were Republican, and if you were a Democrat, you were secular? Some of it has to do with the perfect storm that kind of developed and led to the rise of the religious right. At the same time that Republicans were starting to despair that they were going to be a minority party forever, evangelicals were feeling kind of threatened from a series of Supreme Court decisions in the 1960s that took Bible reading out of schools, prayer out of schools. There was an IRS ruling in the 1970s that took away the tax-exempt status of Bob Jones University. A lot of evangelicals who had previously thought that they could live in kind of their own isolated world and nobody would bug them and they wouldn't bug anyone else, started to realize that they needed to get more involved in politics. At the same time, on the left, there was a movement, and not necessarily in a rational sense, that we were going to become a post-religious society, that was the natural progression of modern societies. People looked at Europe and said, as we become modern, we have fewer reasons to have religious ties or religious affiliations. And I think it certainly misread American history, because Americans are very different from our European cousins when it comes to religion. Even now, on annual surveys, about 85 to 88% of Americans say religion is an important part of their lives. That's 85 to 88%. That's an enormous percentage of the American public.